In ancient times, in a small village nestled in the hills of New England, there lived a young man named Elijah. From childhood, Elijah had heard stories of great prophets and kings who sought God through fasting. He longed to experience this deep connection with the Creator but wasn't sure exactly how to begin. One day, Elijah decided to seek out the wise elder of the village, Rabbi Jonathan, known for his devotion and knowledge of the Scriptures. Arriving at the rabbi's modest home, Elijah found him sitting under an oak tree, studying the sacred scrolls. Rabbi Jonathan, Elijah said respectfully, I want to understand why fasting attracts God and how I should practice it correctly. The elder looked at the young man with compassionate eyes and said, Sit down, my son. Let me tell you a story that illustrates the power of fasting and the mistakes we must avoid. Rabbi Jonathan began his narrative. Many years ago, there lived a man named Ahaz. He was a prosperous merchant, but his heart was far from God. Ahaz decided to fast for 40 days, believing this would automatically make him righteous in the Lord's eyes. During his fast, Ahaz made two grave mistakes. First, he boasted about his abstinence, announcing to everyone in the town square how long he had been fasting. Second, he neglected the poor and needy, refusing to help those who knocked on his door. At the end of the 40 days, Ahaz expected a great revelation or blessing, but nothing happened. Confused and angry, he sought out the prophet Isaiah to understand why his fast hadn't attracted God's attention. Isaiah, guided by the Spirit of the Lord, answered Ahaz with words that echo through time. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen, only a day for people to humble themselves? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter, when you see the naked to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? Elijah listened intently, absorbing every word. Rabbi Jonathan continued, You see, my young friend, the fast that attracts God is not just abstaining from food. It's a change of heart and actions. Ahaz made two fundamental mistakes that we must all avoid during fasting. First, we should never fast for show. Fasting is an intimate practice between you and God. It's not to impress others or gain praise. Jesus taught us, when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Second, we should never neglect compassion and justice during fasting. The true fast that pleases God is one that leads us to act with mercy, to fight against injustice, and to care for those in need. If we fast only for our own spiritual satisfaction, we miss the purpose. Elijah reflected on these words and asked, But Rabbi, why does fasting attract God? How does this practice bring us closer to Him? The wise elder smiled and explained, Fasting, when practiced correctly, attracts God because it demonstrates our sincerity and commitment. When we voluntarily give up something as basic as food, we're telling God, You are more important to me than my physical needs. And moreover, fasting helps us develop self-discipline and focus our mind and spirit on heavenly things. When we feel physical hunger, we're reminded of our spiritual hunger for God. This leads us to a deeper dependence on Him. Fasting also teaches us humility. We recognize our fragility and need for God. This opens our heart to receive His grace and guidance. As it is written, God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. Finally, fasting helps us discern God's will. When we abstain from earthly distractions, our mind becomes clearer and more receptive to the Lord's voice. Many great leaders in the Bible fasted before making important decisions or facing great challenges. Elijah, inspired by the rabbi's words, asked, How can I start practicing fasting in a way that pleases God? Rabbi Jonathan replied, Start with small steps. Choose a day to fast, perhaps skipping one meal. Use that time to pray, meditate on the Scriptures, and reflect on your life. Ask God to reveal areas where you need to grow or change. During your fast, seek opportunities to serve others. Perhaps you can donate the money you saved on the meal to someone in need. Or use the time you would have spent eating to visit someone who is sick or console someone going through difficulties. Always remember, fasting is not a magic formula to obtain favors from God. It's a spiritual discipline that helps us align our heart with His. It's an act of worship, submission, and seeking a deeper intimacy with the Creator. And one more thing, the rabbi added, and never compare your fast to that of others. Each spiritual journey is unique. What matters is your sincerity and obedience to God's will for your life. Elijah thanked the wise rabbi and left, determined to incorporate fasting into his spiritual life. In the following weeks, he began practicing short fasts, always in secret and with a heart turned toward God and his neighbor. Over time, Elijah noticed changes in his life. His patience increased, his compassion for others grew, and he felt a deeper connection with God in his prayers. Fasting had become not just a religious practice, but a path to genuine transformation. Years passed, and Elijah became known in the village not for his fasts, but for his kindness, wisdom, and strong faith. Many young people began to seek him out for spiritual advice, just as he had sought Rabbi Jonathan. One day, an eager young man came to Elijah, asking the same question he had asked so many years ago. Elijah smiled, remembering his own journey, and began to share the wisdom he had acquired. The fast that attracts God, said Elijah, is one that transforms not just our eating habits, but our character. It's a fast that leads us to love more deeply, forgive more quickly, and serve more generously. Always remember, Elijah concluded, that true fasting is not just abstaining from food, but feeding on God's word and good works. It's a fast that leads us to a deeper communion with the Creator and His creation. And so, the wisdom about fasting continued to be passed down from generation to generation, reminding all who seek God that true fasting is a journey of the heart, a discipline that, when practiced with sincerity and compassion, brings us closer to the infinite love and grace of the Lord. This story teaches us that fasting, when practiced correctly, can be a powerful spiritual tool. It helps us develop self-discipline, increases our spiritual sensitivity, and reminds us of our total dependence on God. However, we must always remember that fasting is not an end in itself, but a means of drawing closer to God and living according to His will. As we consider incorporating fasting into our own spiritual lives, we must remember the two crucial mistakes to avoid: ostentation and neglect of compassion. Our fasting should be a personal and intimate practice, not a spectacle to impress others. Furthermore, it should lead us to a greater awareness of others' needs and a deeper desire to serve and love our neighbor. The fast that truly attracts God is one that transforms not only our religious practices but our character and actions. It's a fast that leads us to greater conformity with God's character, manifesting love, justice, and mercy in our daily lives. May we, like Elijah, seek a fasting practice that not only satisfies religious rituals but truly transforms our hearts and brings us closer to God's love and grace. May our fasting be a silent but powerful testimony to God's work in our lives, attracting others not to our religious practices, but to the God we love and serve.